handouts on the app, but I'm also going to give you paper handouts if you would like. Will you just, that would be lovely. Thank you so much. And we do have one more person who's supposed to be here, Cheryl Knapp, and hopefully everything's okay with her. But we're going to go ahead and get started with finding our best during the days that feel like the worst. Diagnosis day, hospital admission, and end of life. Thank you so much for passing those out, Nancy. And they are on your app too. And don't forget at the end, I'll just remind you now to do the evaluation at the end on the app as well, please. So we have Joy, Bobbi, and Shirley here, and I'm going to ask them to each briefly introduce yourselves in 1 or 2 sentences, saying your name and what brings you to caregiving. And I'm going to shut the door while you do that.
Yeah, great idea.
Thank you.
So I'm Joy Laverty, and I'm the author of 2 books. The Complete Elder Care Planner, which came out in the 80s. It's on its 6th edition. And in that process, about 10 years ago, the caregivers started to come up to me and say, you know, this is great, my parents have me, but who's going to take care of me when I'm old? And that book came to me as well. And so now that has been published since October of this year. So that's who I am. Been doing this for 40 years, and I'm not done yet.
Thank you, Joy.
I'm Shirley. I was a mom of a daughter who was born with pediatric liver disease in 1981, and then we found out she had another pediatric liver disease, so she was quite an anomaly for Boston Children's Hospital, and she lived for 32 years. And I changed and grew and fought, and, you know, as you can imagine, throughout that whole process. And in it, I was always alone, and I wrote a book about tools for surviving. And I just recently wrote another book about a workbook in working through some of the beliefs. And so that's why I'm here.
Thank you so much, Shirley.
Hello, I am Bobbi Carducci. I'm a caregiver support group leader in Virginia, where I live. I was a caregiver for my father-in-law, Roger, for 7 years. We dealt with lifelong schizophrenia, Lewy body dementia, Parkinson's disease, dysphagia, and stubborn old Italian disease. During the time that I was a caregiver and interacting with caregivers, so many said, I wish somebody would write a book that tells what it's really like. So my first book was Confessions of an Imperfect Caregiver, which has been called Brutally Honest. And if you ever read that book, you will definitely get to know me. And people used to say, when they found out I was caregiving not only for my father, but for my father-in-law, you must be a saint. And this is what I tell people, I'm no saint, and he would have been the first one to agree with me. I just recently published my second book called Caregiver, You Are Not Alone, which is an anthology of caregiver stories of people at various ages, men and women caring for various family members, and discuss there's short stories of their stories, followed by I have a blog, and one of my blog posts that addresses that issue, so we can confirm to each other that what we're feeling is pretty much universal among caregivers. And
Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to ask you to just wrap it up there so we can keep moving along. And I'm not going to ask all the same questions of all the panelists, but this first question I'll ask you to all answer. So briefly, in 3 minutes or less, please, and I know that's asking a lot, please share your story of the days that felt like the worst and how you coped or didn't. And so, and I know your stories are all really important, and some of you have written books, as you were just talking about. So the audience can find links to those books on the handouts as well. As you can see, all the websites are up here, so please make note of those so you can get more of these important stories. So let's start with you, Joy, your story of the days that felt like the worst.
There were a lot. So the one that just popped in my head is the one where I would just be going along, and then this pertained to caring for my father, and everything I did, someone else told me I was doing it wrong. So so self-doubt, I thought I was doing okay, but then self-doubt would come in, and then they would tell me what I was doing wrong, and then I would begin to doubt myself. So I would say that my I mean, as much as I knew, I was told that I didn't know anything. And so that just really screwed my head up. And I had to sleep. I had a hard time sleeping through that. Like, well, maybe I don't know anything, and maybe I am doing it wrong. And I never got any answers. And the only person I could turn to was myself. And those were really bad times.
Thank you, Joy.
After 32 years, there's a lot too, but I think what sticks out for me is I ended up, when my daughter was 8, she had a older sister as well, I ended up getting divorced. And through that process, I became pretty depressed and despondent and had suicidal ideation. And I'm not proud of it. And then I got fibromyalgia, thank you, God. And there was a power struggle between my daughter who was sick and I, because I couldn't function, and she had gotten used to demanding because it was like she had too much power. And that was a really, really dark time. And we made it through, but yeah, not fun.
Can you briefly share about how you coped?
Well, I had therapy, and I had a great therapist who helped. I made a contract with her that I would not do anything because I had 2 children depending on me. And I found a book called Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway, which is what I'm teaching on this afternoon. And that saved my life. It became my anchor. And I utilized that, and I still utilize it, so much so that I teach it. So
That's awesome. Thank you.
Well, I have to say the worst days for me were the days that he accused me of holding him prisoner, the days that he accused me of trying to poison him, and all the times he would tell the doctors, "She's crazy, don't pay any attention to her, I know what I'm doing." I felt like I spent 7 years trying to save him from himself, and he spent 7 years trying to convince the doctors that I was crazy and he didn't need me. And I did a lot of praying, and I did a lot of crying. And I remember a time when I kept saying, "Dear God, why is this so difficult? Why is it so hard to do good work?" And I went into Mass one Sunday morning, and the priest stood up, and he said, "I've been hearing a lot from people about why life is so hard and why things are so difficult." And I went, "Oh, you heard me, didn't you?" Mm-hmm. And he said, "Nobody told you it was supposed to be easy. And know that when you're doing the difficult work, you're earning your place in heaven." So my husband would come home after a particularly difficult day, and I'd be standing at the door tapping my toe saying, "I earned my place in heaven today." But I don't know that if I actually believed it, but it kind of helped me. And that's crying and praying helped a whole lot.
Thank you so much. And Bobbi, let's just go ahead with you with the next question. What did you do when the medical staff didn't listen to your concerns?
Oh, they learned to fear me. I would call meetings with the patient advocate, with the head nurse, with all of his various doctors, and at one point I said to them, "I understand that you have several patients, hundreds of them. I have one. My job is to make sure that he gets the best possible care, and unless you want to listen to me scream, you will listen to me now." And so I took a very hard stand, which is not easy for someone who, believe it or not, is an introvert by nature, but I was fierce.
Thank you. Thank you, Bobbi. Okay, and Joy, why do we feel so guilty when a loved one is hospitalized?
Because we think it's our fault, and we think that there was something we could do, and we think we have a lot of answers, and we forget that it's not our plan. And we just think, well, we make a plan and then it's going to stick. So we don't have any kind of power whatsoever. It's not even our life. And so we feel guilty all the time. It doesn't matter where we are. And even after they die, we still can remember things that continue to make us feel guilty. So the guilt thing I'm going to be talking about in my talk tomorrow at 10 o'clock, because it's a power that never leaves us.
Thank you. Thank you. And Shirley, can you talk to us about what is chronic sorrow?
Sure. It was probably when my daughter was around 10 years old, I started wanting to be a family therapist so I could help other people, which I never actually did. But in that research, I found an article by a pediatric, a NICU, neonatal intensive care nurse, who came up with a theory of chronic sorrow that's the never-ending grief that happens. And because there's always new diagnoses coming, and it would throw me into another loop of feeling angry. I related it to Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's stages, only it was different. It helped me understand that that it's normal for me to get depressed again when we have a new diagnosis. On top of dealing with a crisis, then there's a new diagnosis and getting used to that and all the medication and doctor's appointments. And so it's a loop that doesn't end because it's the grief. And I've actually had other caregivers talk to me about, well, I feel that way about climate change, and I feel that way about, other things in the world or about problems. And it's this loop of chronic sorrow, and it's really important for us to understand that it happens, and I used to beat myself up about it. Why can't I just get it? And, it's a reoccurring thing. So
Thank
it's very
you.
helpful.
That's so important to know about that. And I didn't really actually get to introduce myself at the beginning. I apologize. I'm Becky Henry, and I am I'm the coach for caregivers of those with eating disorders. And oftentimes they talk about this piece of the chronic sorrow because it's just like ongoing, and then they get the eating disorder maybe under control, and then it's like, oh, okay, it's not bulimia anymore, now it's anorexia. Oh, now it's not anorexia, it's binge eating disorder. Oh, now it's compulsive overeating. Oh, oh, now it's alcohol. Oh, now it's drugs. And it's just like ongoing, will this ever end? Yeah. So thank you for sharing that piece. And then Shirley, can you say, as long as you've got the mic there, I understand the self-care piece is so important, and I'll be speaking about that tomorrow. How can awareness of my self-talk help with the self-care?
Well, even though none of us want to admit it, we all have a chatterbox, a monkey mind that's going along, and we all have a higher self who is that's very quiet, gentle, and loving. And society supports the chatterbox, TV and news and, the pressures. And as I have learned to not listen to my chatterbox, because you can't get rid of a chatterbox, but you can strengthen the connection to something that supports you within. And it's not relying on anything but what we train ourselves. And so I have developed tools. What's in the book of The Field of Fear has tools, and that's where my strength is, in my higher self connection, instead of listening to what I call the loop of poop that continues. It just goes around and around with all the crap that feeds us.
Awesome.
And to me, that is the key. Sorry, but it's true.
Thank you. Okay, and Bobbi, why did you choose in-home hospice, and did that work for your family?
It absolutely did work for us, and one of the reasons that we chose it was that's what he wanted. Mike's dad, he always said that he wanted to die at home, and if there was a way for us to do that, we were going to do it. The other was, when he was admitted to the hospital, he would tell the nurses and the doctors, I'm okay, go take care of the sick people. And when you have hundreds of patients and you have somebody who's denying pain and denying they're sick, you're going to go ahead and take care of the ones that are looking. And I have to say that it was an absolutely beautiful experience, the in-home hospice. And one of the reasons it came about was he was in one of his last admissions in the hospital, and he woke up with me sitting at his bedside, and he said, I had a dream last night. God told me my job is done. And I went looking for the chaplain, and they said they know. They absolutely know. And he talked about going back to Pittsburgh and where he's going to be buried next to his wife and so on. After caregiving stopped, a friend of mine said, you realize, Bobbi, his job was you. Because of what you did with him, this is what you're doing now. And to me, that's one of the most beautiful moments in my caregiving experience. But the hospice workers were amazing also. If I have just a second more, it looked like he was going to die on his birthday. on his 83rd birthday, and my husband was devastated. I can't believe my dad's going to die on his birthday. And the hospice nurse said, what better gift than to see the face of God on your birthday? And he did. He passed on the early morning hours of his 83rd birthday and saw the face of God.
Wow, that's powerful. So can you please, as on that note, share with us, how can one deal with feeling relieved when a loved one passes away?
I think it's almost normal for us who have spent years in the caregiving world to feel that. And interestingly enough, his mother lived to be 102 years old. And at her funeral, he turned to my husband and I, he said, you know, I feel relieved. And it's not just relief that our caregiving is over, it's their pain is over. And I truly do believe that they're in a better place. But we have done what we're doing for so long that, yes, we're going to feel a sense of relief, but we're also going to grieve. And caregiver guilt lives with us forever. But when that happens, understand that that relief was for them even more than it was for us.
Thank you. Thank you. And let's go back to Joy. What do you wish someone had told you to prepare for diagnosis day?
That I was going to react too fast, that I wasn't going to take a deep breath and think about things, that I would kick in with some kind of action plan and think that there was something to do way too fast instead of just taking a deep breath, sitting down, maybe in a quiet room or something like that. So there were too many times I made too many decisions that were unnecessary. So I wish they had told me to just say, okay, go sit with this for about a half hour. That's what I wish they had told me.
That's great. I love that. Just sit with this for about half an hour. And that's hard, you know, when you're hearing some big news. Really hard. That's great. Shirley, how can 5 minutes a day make a difference for a caregiver?
Yes, I run a caregiver support group too in Massachusetts, and often have caregivers who say to me, I have absolutely no time during the day to do anything, and I'm trying to advocate for even a minute, and they have to pee, they have to go to the bathroom. That's self-care. And so there's actually ways to one of my goals is to help people bring themselves into their bodies, because it brings them into the now instead of worrying about the future or reliving the past. Bringing them into their bodies helps them. It's calming. And so a 1-minute meditation I've developed so that they can just listen to it, bring them into their body, then move on. And it actually does. It is calming. It is helpful. And so, and 5 minutes is great too, but sometimes they argue with me. There's no 5 minutes.
Right. We just have a minute.
Yeah.
I love it.
I know.
It's funny what you mentioned the bathroom thing, because that's what I always tell the parents who have kids with eating disorders or loved ones, other loved ones. I say, go in the bathroom and do a breathing exercise. You can, for 1 minute or 2 minutes, you can do some pretty solid breathing. And I always teach them the hand one. Have any of you ever done this? Where you breathe in, pause, breathe out, breathe in, pause, breathe out. And you can do this any speed.
Yeah, I teach square breathing, which is breathe in, pause, breathe out, pause.
The 4-4-4.
Yes, yeah, it's very similar to that.
Yeah, I like this because it connects you with your body so much.
Yep.
That tactile thing that this finger is
Very
touching
good.
this hand, and it's like,
Yeah, that's
you're
very
really
good.
connected with your body. You can do it in a meeting,
And there are actual guided meditations for a minute, 5 minutes, where somebody's talking, because sometimes I can't even, where am I? It's all screaming inside.
Yeah.
So that helps too.
Oh, that's great. Thanks, Shirley. Okay, let's go back to Joy. How could you have been able to be calmer during times in the hospital?
I would go look for the chapel. There was always a chapel, and I would head for the chapel.
Thank you.
And it was really quiet and really peaceful, and I would go there even when I didn't want to.
And Shirley or Bobby, do you have anything to say on that one? How you could have been calmer during times?
I'll just say quickly, Bobby, before you go, is that I learned a technique of through therapy of passing a coin from one hand to the other. It's very much like knitting because you're using both sides of the brain, and it's very calming. I use it to this day. I have one in my pocketbook, and it actually causes a calming, and it's just a simple activity. Nobody has to know, because I used to, have these panic attacks, and everybody could see it, but nobody has to know that I'm doing it, and it creates this calming, inner calming.
Wow,
So
that's
it's a real
great.
easy technique, and I actually pass coins out to my people that I teach in classes and stuff.
Love it.
Yeah.
I think we had a question here.
It can be a coin, it can be a paper clip, it can be a pen, but it's the process of passing back and forth. It's I don't know why, but I have found information online that it creates a calming. It's like the knitting. Knitting creates calming. It's because you're using both sides of the brain, and you're focusing.
Another question?
Pardon? Yes, absolutely. Yep.
And
I didn't know.
Bobby, did you have anything on that?
I can just say from the day that letters came together on a page to form words, I've been an absolutely avid reader, and I rarely go anywhere without a book. And I could sit at his bedside for hours, and I could set it down at a moment's notice or be aware if I needed to. But it got me into another world, and that's what worked for me.
Thank you. And just a reminder, can you hold the mic a little closer when you're talking? Thank you. And we've got people who may be listening to this recording later, too. So we just need to use the mics. Joy, what do you know now that you wish you'd known at the end of life?
That I could never prepare for the grief when caregiving's over. That I thought I could, and then I would read, or I would pray, or I would hang out with people and talk about it, and it was never like I thought it was going to be when it actually happened. And so I wouldn't have angst so much about it. I would just let that process be as natural as possible. So I wouldn't spend much time on that.
Thank you. And Bobby, I'm going to ask you that one, too. And how do you wish you could have been calmer during times in the hospital?
I don't know really that I wasn't calm, but like I said, I did a good bit of reading, and I also made connections with the healthcare, with the nurses and with the doctors, and even the people that brought water, and just spending a moment or two speaking to them about how things were going or about what was going on in their family, kind of helped me bring me back into the real world, other than just being there as a caregiver and watching and making sure that things got done the way that they needed to do.
Thank you. And Shirley, would you like to answer that one too, about how you would have been calmer in the hospital?
I think as I age, I'm easier on myself, and I never have been easy on myself, so that I would get upset that I'm showing emotion, which was kind of like, because I've grown up judging myself. I grew up in such a judging household, so that this inner judge would just constantly be going, and so just having more compassion for myself for what I went through, which was 32 years of, and then losing a child is horrible. So just having more compassion for myself.
That's such an important piece, isn't it?
Yeah,
I mean,
it's
all
so
the things you
important.
have all said are so important, and I think having compassion for ourselves during this journey is so, so powerful. I mean, it's just like you're all just exuding this amazing, loving compassion, and it's like, wouldn't it be amazing if you had that for yourselves too?
And what a different world it would be if everyone had that element.
Yeah, thank you. So, Joy, what do you know now that you wish you'd known about end of life?
You asked me that.
I asked you that one already. I'm sorry. Whoops. Okay. All right, what worked and what didn't work for you to take care of yourself during the worst days? I know you talked about that a little bit already.
Just that there's a lot of pressure for people to, they say, take care of yourself, and then we instantly go in our head called exercise. Oh, okay, I'm going to walk. I'm going to, get on the treadmill. There's so much pressure that we put on ourselves about this exercise thing, and it's ridiculous. So that is one thing that I just stopped having that poopy talk all day long about exercising, and just like when, half the time what I needed was a good night's sleep, so that really helps. So it's like stop the pressure to exercise, Joy.
Love it. And Shirley, can you answer that one too?
Could you repeat the question?
Absolutely. What worked and didn't work for you to take care of yourself during the worst days? You mentioned some of the things, like putting the coin back and forth.
Yeah. I probably have to say that just being so hard on myself through the whole process, understanding myself, going through years of therapy helped me understand growing up in an abusive household, which I didn't really realize I did until I got into therapy when my daughter was sick. Understanding what makes me trigger is so important. And then I can come up with remedies to help myself.
Thank you. And how about you, Bobbi? What worked and didn't work for you to take care of yourself during the worst days?
I drank.
You drank?
No, no. I would have a glass of wine, but actually, it was again going back into myself and reminding myself about where we were in the journey and where we were going to go, and taking advantage of what I called the moments of clarity, when this wonderful man talked about his life growing up in Italy and some of the wonderful stories that he shared with me. And I have to say, he's never left me. I still hear him in the house. I still hear his walker. And sometimes I feel his presence in a very real way. So I hope that answers the question.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you. And I'm going to just ask you guys some of Cheryl's questions, too, if you don't mind. If you don't have an answer, just raise your hand and let me know who would like to answer this. How was your role compromised as an advocate, if you were one, during the hospitalization for medication reevaluation? Does that, okay. Thank you, Shirley.
Well, I went through the process when my daughter was, before she turned 18, that I was a major advocate. And then when she turned 18, it was kind of like, Mom, I want you to sit in the waiting room. And I visualized duct tape over my mouth and on my hands under my butt, because that's the only way I could control myself. But I have had, we become the expert of our caregiving. We become the expert. And oftentimes when we were in a teaching hospital in Boston, and the young ones come in with all their huff and puff, and they know this and they know that, and they know nothing. And we experienced times when tests had to be put off because they gave the wrong medication that caused her to be more of a bleeder. And learning to how not to take it out on the doctor who makes a mistake, because they're human too, even though we want them to have all the answers. So it's tough. Mm-hmm. It's really tough.
Yeah. Did you have anything on that one, Bobbi? Okay. And this is another one for the three of you to choose from. What were your considerations and emotions on the day you had to make the end of life decision, if you had to do that?
I'll answer that again. I was probably the only one in that had the courage to talk to my daughter about end of life before end of life, because we were dealing with a transplant, and so they encourage us to talk about end of life. I found a website online called legacywriter.com that you can actually choose end of life for free and fill out a whole form. And if you want extra stuff, you end up paying. But I was able to do it, and we sat, and the computer became the bad guy, and I just sat, this is the question, what's your answer? And we cried through it and all. But that form, that piece of paper, helped me deal. We were in Indiana at the transplant center when we discovered that, oh my God, she's not in her body anymore, but her heart is beating. And the doctor came in with a paper in hand, and he says, this is what we need to do. And all I had to do was just nod my head, because it was all written down on a piece of paper, which saved my ass, basically, because I was pretty much non-functional. But that work ahead of time was essential. And it's hard. It's really hard talking about end of life with the one you love and you don't want them to die.
What a very, very courageous act on your part and your daughter's part. And how powerful that it really helped you at that end moment, then it made it easier for you. So I think for people who may be in the position of having to do that, like, okay, it's going to be pretty icky and miserable and awful, and it will make it easier later on. And it gave her some more power in the situation, I imagine.
And it gave her a voice, right, because she was terrified. She was terrified so that we could sit together. And her father didn't want anything to do with it. Her sister, of course, didn't want anything to do with it, and that was it. So it really, in a sense, it was a gift, even though it was very, very hard. And, it's worth the pain. And it's still hard to talk about, but it is so, so important to share these things, because people don't talk about this stuff.
Right, right. It's so awesome that you did that.
Yeah.
Bobbi, how about you? Do you have any insights on that piece?
Well, I'd like to share what happened in our home when the hospice people came in and they brought the comfort kit. And if you're not familiar with that, it's a box of medications and drugs that help the end of life. And in our box was morphine. And the first time I administered the morphine to my father-in-law, I told my husband when he came home, and he was very upset that I had done this. And his question was, well, what if somebody thinks we drugged my dad? His brother and my father-in-law's brother both had disengaged, and he was afraid that we would be accused of having done something. And I was devastated that my husband would think that I had done something wrong in doing this, and he didn't understand why I was doing this. And it really caused kind of a rift with us for a while, because why are you not trusting me? I've been taking care of this man for 7 years. I'm doing what I've been advised to do by the professionals. And it took a social worker coming into the house to explain it to him, and then he was okay with it. So you may have this issue come up, and we got past it, but there's still this little niggling thing. Why didn't you trust me? Why did that person have to say that to you? But it really does ease them at the end of life. And another difficult decision that a caregiver have to make, and be strong enough to do what you have to do in the moment.
That's so important. Thank you, Bobbi. And then the piece, I wasn't there and I have no idea. I've never met your husband, but I can imagine just people in general. Like, he's scared and he's like, well, you've heard about people getting in trouble for assisted suicide or whatever, and it's like, where in the journey with the tiny bit of energy one has left could we talk to the other people in the family and say, just FYI, this is the next stage that's coming. I don't know if there was anyone in your realm who was giving you that assistance.
The thing is, I thought he knew that. I thought we'd had that conversation, but sometimes with spouses, and I'm sorry, but a lot of times with men, they don't really listen. So maybe.
Perfect. That's awesome.
That's good.
Yes, Joy. Were you finished, Bobbi? Okay, Joy.
I just want to say it doesn't end after the death of our loved ones. So at the funeral, boy, did I hear about how we screwed everything up and we killed our father. So that it doesn't end. So everything happens, according to the plan of God or whoever's in charge of the death. But then at the funeral, you're going to hear about it too. So just be aware that you shouldn't have done this and you shouldn't have done that, and then on and so because death brings out so much anger in people. Yeah. So I'm just saying, sometimes the worst nightmare of how everything was going wrong, and it was at the funeral.
That's just so unfortunate, and I just, I'm so glad you're all doing the work you're doing to help people, because it seems like if families could be told, okay, you're going to have a lot of emotions at the funeral, and you maybe want to take the anger out on someone. Please don't take it out on the person who just spent the last X number of years taking care of your loved one.
Well,
They did
there's-
the best they
yeah.
could do.
There's no telling anyone when someone does do that at a funeral, and you just let them talk and just nod your head and say, well, thank you for sharing that with me. And it's just like, just let them, they're in a need to tell somebody something. And, and
Yeah.
so I never would interrupt anybody just because they have to get it out.
Yeah, don't take it personally, right?
Oh, no, God, no.
And I learned a technique of visualization that I have a window in my solar plexus area, and it's open, and the wind is blowing, and there it goes.
I love it.
Because you can't shut that off, and why soak it up? It only hurts.
Great. Oh, wow. I like that. Speaking of end-of-life stuff, Bobbi, I wanted to ask you, what does a caregiver do after the caregiving ends?
Well, that's my topic for tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. What do I do now? And the first thing you have to do is take all that time that you didn't taking care of yourself, start doing it. And very likely you're going to have some PTSD. Now, one of the things that I did, and I was so fortunate, my husband felt a great deal of guilt over the fact that I was taking care of his father. And I said, this is what I want at the end. Once your dad passes and we get past the worst of the grief, I want 1 month to go away. And I don't care if it's the local no-tell motel. I want to be able to sleep when I'm tired and eat when I'm hungry and do nothing when I want to do nothing. I want 30 days to do that at the end. And his dad grew up in Italy, and we were fortunate that we were able to do this. We were going to go back to his family home in Italy for that month. Well, the man comes to me and says, I'm sorry, baby, I cannot get a month off. I can only get 3 weeks. I'm so sorry. I said, what kind of spoiled brat would I be if I wouldn't take the three weeks? Which we did, and we were able to go to Assisi, and we came across a mass out in the open, and I got to make a cross out of some twigs and put my hairband in it, and some of my hair was floating in it. And that's where I really said goodbye to my father-in-law there. But even if it's in your own home, you need to take that time to grieve and to get back in touch with yourself, because it's going to take you at least a year to begin to feel somewhat normal again, and give yourself that time. Go to the no-tell motel.
Shirley, do you have any words to share on that question?
About end of
What
life?
after caregiving ends, what do you do? It had to be so hard after your daughter was gone.
Yeah, and her sister, when my daughter died in Indiana, I was alone with her, and we had given the family, and they had come in and out, but we had given the family, you got to come now. But airplane flights and flying in, nobody was there when she left. And there's a lot of guilt there. And so, unfortunately, as I have PTSD, and I'm dealing with it, my living daughter, kind of reacted in a way that she got angry at me because her whole life was around her sick sister. And between that and trying to recover, it was a really, really tough time to take time for myself. But I was able to just kind of isolate, and it took me probably a good 2 years to be able to function well out in public, because everybody knows, so and the thing I hate is people would see me and they go, and for the virtual people, they'd look at me and go, oh, poor you, their foreheads are, and they start tearing up, and it's like, that's the last thing I need. I need people who are,
Like, hi, Shirley, it's good to see you again. I'm thinking about you.
Yes, but the pain of losing a child, people can't deal with it mostly, and so they bring that to me, thinking that's going to help me feel better, and doesn't.
Yeah, thank you. That's so important, and it is such a taboo subject in our culture, you know, having a child die. And I happen to have many, many friends who have dead children. I have way too many friends with dead children. That's the world I live in, though. So it's not a verboten topic to me, but most of the world it really is. Joy, did you have any pieces you wanted to share on that?
Sure. My mom lived with us, and so 6 o'clock, no, 6:30, Wheel of Fortune. That was it. That was our tradition. And so I knew, and my mom just died, and I knew that 6:30 was going to be a tough time. So I fill it now with go to yoga at 6:30 because I knew that was going to be tough. So that's just what I did. I knew that I had to fill that with something. So I did, and it's working.
That is beautiful. And I think we have time for probably maybe one or two more questions. And if you all have questions, please raise your hand and we'll get those answered. What do you believe, and you guys can raise your hand on who wants to take this first. I think you'll all want to answer this. What do you believe has been the lasting result, or a lasting result, maybe there have been more than one, of not having done enough to keep your cup filled up during the worst days? Who wants to go first? A lasting result. Like you, Shirley, talked about your illness, your chronic illness.
Yeah. Well, having fibromyalgia, then I developed a small intestine bacterial overgrowth from overeating for years and years. I find that if I don't take care of myself, I am immobilized by pain. And it is a wonderful motivator because I don't want to live like that. And so I've instituted meditation. I quit my job, so I don't do anything but what I prefer now, and we just make it happen with dealing with money because I can't deal with it. I suffered the worst loss that I could imagine, surprised that I survived, and realizing that people tell me they could never deal with that, but we deal with what's dealt with us, and I am a really strong believer in modeling. And as I stand up and talk about the death of my daughter, I'm modeling that I'm a survivor of it. And there's so many hellacious things happening. We can survive it, even though they're horrible. And I want to model that to people, and that there are ways to do it. We just have to, pick up the tool and use it on ourselves instead of waiting for somebody to help us.
That's so awesome, that choice piece that, you didn't get to choose that your daughter was going to live or die, but you get to choose how you react to it. Yeah. Did you want to answer that one, Bobbi?
I did.
You want me to repeat the question?
Yes, please.
Okay. What do you believe has been a lasting result of not having done enough to keep your cup filled up during the worst days?
Panic attacks. I had my very first panic attack in the last year of caregiving. Woke up in the middle of the night, heart racing, convinced I was having a heart attack, and woke my husband, and he says, "What is it, Dad?" And I said, "No, it's me. There's something wrong. Call the ambulance." He stood at the foot of the bed walking in circles. I said, "Mike, I'm in trouble. Call the ambulance. Call 911. He said, "I can't remember the number." 911, call. Well, I felt one lasting effect of that is I don't know that if I'm in trouble, somebody's going to save me. The other thing is, even though they've lessened over the years, the panic attacks still come. They're still caused by stress. And not nearly as often, and I know what they are now, and I don't get as scared. But when you're my age and you feel something going on with your heart, you always wonder. So that's one of the reasons why it's so important to do what these ladies have talked to you about caring for yourself, because you don't want to end up with a legacy like this.
Thank you, Bobbi. Did you have anything on that one, Joy?
I just know that, so I've been caregiving since I was 14. So early on, I knew that I had to surround myself with people. I would practice critical thinking, but I didn't know that's what it was. So I would ask a lot of questions of a lot of people. What would you do? What would you do? And I would just go around. So before I learned how to do that, I was digging a lot of ditches and really screwing things up. So early on, then I learned how to ask a lot of questions. So I didn't have a lot of residual stuff. And things, even if they weren't going well, I was able to dig it out. So I guess I learned the hard way early, and then I fixed it up as best I could. So
Thank you. Thank you. We have just a couple minutes left. Are there any questions any of you have that you'd like to ask the panelists? Yes. Is it on your website?
Every author is going to have an author signing after they speak here at the conference, and there is a table in the grand ballroom where everyone will be. But for the most part, all of our books are available wherever books are sold. So anywhere, bookstores, internet.
Amazon.
Yeah.
Are you all on Amazon?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, all of us are
So we
on
all
Amazon.
brought books. And then-
Yes, we have exhibit tables if we
and
have a table.
Yeah, the
It's out there
author
now.
signings are happening all the time.
The tables are out there now.
Yeah, so the exhibitors are out here in the exhibit hall, and then authors
In the grand
grand ballroom. There's a table, and there's a little schedule, and if you want, you could just take a picture of the little schedule and see who you want to go talk to and when they're going to be signing. I would just take a picture of this if I were you, and then you will have everybody's websites. You wrote it down, and it's
And
on
the-
the handout on the app.
And the author book signing is listed under events on the app. Yeah.
Oh, thank you, Shirley. And thank you all so much for coming, and please do the rating on the app if you're able. And thank you all for being here on the panel.
You did a fabulous job.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
As I was explaining, I am known as the imperfect caregiver. I was a caregiver for my father-in-law for 7 years. When he came into our home, we thought we knew what we were getting into, and we did not. In part because he had been diagnosed with schizophrenia in 1947 and had spent 13 years in a mental institution before they developed the medications that allowed him to live outside the hospital. But that was hidden. It was hidden from the family. I was told that he had a plate in his head from a war injury, which was not true. I knew him as my gentle, kind of odd father-in-law, very introverted. We didn't have a lot of interaction. So we said, when he came to live with us, we know it'll be hard sometimes. We'll be able to handle it. Not knowing what we were getting into, but had we known, we would have done it anyway. I have this quote that I found by Joan Didion. I have already lost touch with a couple of the people I used to be, which I think so appropriate for caregivers, because you so devote your lives to other people and put your needs behind you that you begin to lose touch with yourself. I didn't know that when his dad came to us that not only was he schizophrenic, but that he would develop dementia and Parkinson's disease and dysphagia, which is severe swallowing problems. So his food had to be pureed, and he had to have honey-thickened liquids, and he had to be observed when he was eating all the time. He had a heart problem. He had what I called stubborn old Italian disease, which was quite prominent. But I didn't know that I would be infected too. And I want you to think about that. When he wandered, I followed. When he lashed out at me, I lost my temper. And then I was absolutely guilt-ridden, and I questioned my humanity. I remember saying to my husband one day, I'm not the person I thought I was. And he said, who was that? And I said, a good person, a compassionate person, somebody who knows better to respond like this. I questioned my humanity at that point. When he refused to shower, and I didn't feel safe leaving him long enough to take a shower myself, I looked at my disheveled self in the mirror, and I looked, and I probably smelled as bad as he did. When he was admitted to the hospital, I went to him to a bed, me to a chair beside him to make sure that the hospital personnel paid attention to the fact that his diet was restricted, and make sure that they didn't give him ice water, which he couldn't swallow or might aspirate. So we were admitted to the hospital together. One of the doctors asked me, "Do you ever leave?" Because I would go in first thing in the morning before breakfast to help feed him and stay until he was ready to go to sleep at night. As he continued to fail, I felt like a failure. Why couldn't I fix this? Why couldn't I help him? And I felt pieces of myself falling away. As he failed, I was losing more and more of myself. And when he died, he took part of me with him. And he left part of himself with me. The fact is, he's still with me. I sometimes still hear his walker going down the hallway. I sometimes feel his presence. I can tell you that he changed the course of my life. I have been a writer since I was 8 years old, and what I write about now is caregiving. What I do now is speak about caregiving. I never left the caregiving world. He changed my life. And I know each one of you are being changed as well, probably in ways you don't even understand at this point. But I'm here to talk to you today about reclaiming your life and rebuilding relationships. What the most important thing I think you need to do when caregiving ends, and especially for someone like you who have cared for so many people for so long, is to take time to heal. I don't know if it has occurred to you, but you could very much be going into so much stress and have experienced so much stress for so long that you are going to have some post-traumatic stress disorder. You're going to have some depression, some anger, some health issues. And the first relationship that you're going to have to rebuild, or I'm going to talk to you about rebuilding today, is rebuilding your relationship with yourself. Usually when we think about PTSD, we think about soldiers, we think about first responders and shootings and bombings and that kind of stress. But think about what it is, the day-to-day life of a caregiver. You're often sleep deprived because the person in care isn't sleeping. So if they're awake, you're awake. Again, back to this, I'm infected too. He has the disease, but I have it along with him. When it takes 2 or 3 hours to feed him a meal, then I rush my own meal or I skip my own meal. I am constantly super aware of what's going on around me. I hear him when he gets up. I hear him when he sits down. I watch him when he walks to the bathroom. I am watching him constantly for signs that he's getting sick, for signs that he's in pain. So I'm experiencing a lot of the symptoms and the actions of somebody who is under attack. The stress reached such a point that I was having panic attacks, I was having migraines, my hair was falling out, all signs of post-traumatic stress. Depression, anger at myself for not being able to deal with what was happening, anger at my husband because he got to go to work every day and deal with rational people and go to lunch and talk with people who understood, tell jokes, and even on the weekends when he wasn't at work, he was the one that was out running the errands, getting the car inspected, cutting the grass, going to get the groceries, and I was with my father-in-law 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, for 7 years. And I thought that was a really long time. How long have you actually been a caregiver? 13 years. I was in a workshop yesterday with Shirley Riga, who was a caregiver for her daughter for 32 years. 7 years seemed like an awful long time for me, but other caregivers do it for 15 years, 20 years, 30 years. Very often caregivers ignore their own health issues. I don't have time to go to the doctors. And caregivers die very often before the person in care because we neglect ourselves. So by the time my father-in-law had passed away, I was a wreck. I barely recognized myself anymore. So the first thing I'm going to tell you about reclaiming yourself is to rest. To rest as much as possible. I actually talked to Mike and I said, once Dad is passed and once we get past the worst of the grief, I want 30 days away from home, and I don't care where we go. If we can go to the local no-tail motel down the road, but I want to be someplace where I can sleep until I wake up. I want to be someplace where I don't have to pay any attention to anybody's schedule but my own. I want to eat when I'm hungry. I just need time to myself. And we were able to do that. Now, not everybody can do that, but to whatever degree that you can, I encourage you to do that. Rest, 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 rest. It'd probably be the first time that you're actually sleeping through the night. It may even take you weeks to be able to do that again because you're still going to be hypervigilant, listening for those sounds in the house. Take time to do absolutely nothing. Hunker down under the covers. Build the fort under the table and hide out in color like a kid. Do whatever it is that you can nurture yourself, because you're not going to be able to reestablish relationships with anybody else while you're still rebuilding your relationship with yourself, the one that you have ignored for so long. And grieve. Now, most of us have been grieving through the process because we know what the end result is going to be. And because no matter how hard we work, everything we do is going to end up with the person dying. And that used to drive me absolutely crazy because we'd have one issue and I would deal with that and think, oh, goodness, I can relax for a minute. And then 2 more would pop up over here and I would deal with those. And then another one, and it just kept going and kept going and going. And I can guarantee you, whatever holiday was coming up, there would be a crisis. And we'd end up in a hospital again. So you're going to grieve for the one that you lost, but you're also going to grieve for what you lost. Very often, friends and family drop away. The friends that you had, they're busy with their own lives. They may have started inviting you to join them from time to time, but you couldn't. And this happened so many times, they just drifted away. You may have family members who don't agree with what you're doing for the person in care, or the ones that you thought would be there for you have not, and you're angry. And possibly they're accusing you of not doing it right. They're not there to do it, but they don't approve with what you're doing. And sometimes these relationships are broken. Maybe you've lost your career. You've taken so many days off from work that you've lost your job, or you've lost the promotion that you hoped for, and you're grieving for that as well. Maybe your marriage is broken. My husband and I really like each other. We've been married for 31 years, and we tell people we're still newlyweds. How long have you been married? Not long enough. We really enjoy being together. But during those 7 years, we fought more than we ever had before or since. And if you don't have that strong a bond as we had, it can break your marriage, and it often does, because there's so much stress. So you can't expect to be whole, probably not for at least a year, if not longer. So we're going to go on to how to reclaim your life, your family, your friends. You might have to redefine who your family is, because maybe the people that you thought were going to be there aren't. And maybe somebody who you knew peripherally stepped up and was there for you unexpectedly and did a whole lot more for you. When it comes time to rebuild your relationship with your family, I encourage you to do it on your own terms. People always have expectations of us. They might think and may even say, well, you're not being a caregiver anymore, you know, step up, do this for the family, come to this family function. It couldn't possibly have been as difficult as you said it was. I mean, one of the first things people said to me when I left my corporate job to stay home as a full-time caregiver for my father-in-law was, what are you going to do all day? I'm worried about you. You're used to being social. You're used to going into the office every day and dealing with people. You're not going to have anything to do. What are you going to do all day? And in my misunderstanding of what I had walked into, when Mike said to me, I feel guilty, you know, that you're leaving your job, you're sacrificing to take care of my dad, I feel bad. I said, well, don't feel bad, because when he gets up in the morning, I'll see to it that he gets dressed, I'll fix his breakfast, I'll give him the medication, and then I'm going to take my cup of tea and the newspaper out on the deck. That never happened. But if you don't know what you're getting into, your perception is very, very wrong. So I'm encouraging you in reestablishing these relationships, make sure that you do it on your own terms. You don't do anything in anybody else's time frame. It's only when you are ready with who you want to be with for the amount of time that you want to be with them. And when people ask you, how are you doing? How are you coping? What we typically say when people ask us that is, I'm fine, how are you? Don't ever say that. Fine is not the answer. Whether it's during your caregiving time, because you are caregiving now, correct? How many people here are caregiving now? And the rest of you are, no, what do I do now? Anytime anybody asks you, how are you, forget about being the polite Catholic school girl that I was and taught. You say, you're fine, how are you, and you move on. You are not fine. You don't tell people you're fine. You say, I am exhausted. I am lonely. I need somebody to come and sit with my person in care so I can take a shower without worrying about it, so I can pee in peace. I'm tired. I need help. And if somebody says to you, let me know if there's anything I can do, you give them a job. Can you come by once a month with a casserole so I don't have to cook dinner? Do you have a teenage son who can cut the grass for me? Your husband's a mechanic. Can he take my car to be inspected? They don't have to do a lot of things. And some people ask you that question, if there's anything I can do to help, simply to be polite because that's what they were taught. But some of them really want to help and they don't know what to do. And if you keep telling them that you're fine, they're going to believe you. So don't tell them that. Hold on just a second. Can you repeat that, please?
I think I actually haven't been a caregiver, but I've been a cancer survivor, so I've been kind of on the other side of that. And I know that, people wanted to respect my boundaries. If I said I'm fine, people didn't want to intrude themselves. So I needed to be willing to open myself up and let them in, and not expect them to try and pry. I mean, I'm like that too. Like if someone tells me they're fine and they don't want help, then I try and respect that, but I still worry about them, and I don't always believe that they're fine. You know what I mean?
Does anyone else want to add to that?
So I've been trying to explain my feelings to people because so many people are unprepared and they don't seek this information out ahead of time. So I feel like it's a public service, thing that I'm doing at this point when somebody asks me, how's it been, how are you doing, to try and be honest with them and let them know, because, in many cases, they're not prepared. And I think back now on how many people I know whose parents died, especially their mother, and how I didn't really react to it. And now I know how meaningful it is to me that somebody reached out to me because my mother died, and, made a promise that anyone whose mother died, I will, take some kind of action besides asking them how they are. So I just feel like in order for people to really understand the whole caregiving process and grief process, we who are going through it need to actually be honest and talk about the experience.
You are so absolutely right. And the fact of the matter is, Alzheimer's organization now tells us at present 1 in 3 seniors are going to die with some form of dementia. 1 in 3. Now, I have a daughter. She's got 2 parents. Her husband's got 2 parents. 1 in 3. I have a son. He's got 2 parents. His wife's got 2 parents. 1 in 3. Her mother's already in a care facility. I have another daughter, another son, same thing. If you look just within our family right there, the chances are that some of us are going to be in that demographic. And that number is expected to double or triple in the next 10 to 15 years, which means my adult children are going to be caring for their parents, their spouses, possibly their brothers and sisters. So one of the things that I did was I developed a program called Prepare to Care to teach adults what they need to know about Alzheimer's and dementia and caregiving in general before and after it strikes home, because they have no idea what's coming their way. And what you're doing is absolutely right. We need to get the word out about what this is really like so they can prepare, because they don't know. They don't know how expensive it's going to be. They don't know how it can destroy families. They don't know how to react to the behaviors. They have no idea why these things are happening. So it's absolutely imperative that we are honest and that we share what we know. I had a thought in my head and it went away. Those of us who are in this position, in my age group, and with your brothers and sisters, if there is a caregiver conference, if there's a caregiver workshop dealing with these caregiving issues, bring your children, bring your brothers and sisters. You will be helping them prepare for what's coming for them. We need to convince young people to get long-term care insurance at an age when it's still affordable. We live in Northern Virginia, and a care facility there costs anywhere between $80,000 and $120,000 a year. Who can afford that? Who can afford that? Well, you know what that means. Family caregivers. The more caregivers there are, or more people needing care, if you can't afford it, there's not going to be a room for it. So more and more family caregivers. So we need to teach them how to do this. I'm going to tell you before I change the slide, find a safe place to vent. You're going to need somebody that will sit and listen to you when you say, God damn it, I can't stand this another minute. I don't think I can do this. And you will feel that way. And you're going to feel guilty about it. And I have a friend that says, guilt is a useless emotion. Don't bother with it. Well, I'm going to feel guilty. So what I've decided to tell people to do is embrace it. Feel the guilt, wallow in it for 10 to 15 minutes, then get up and carry on. Because we like to blame ourselves. But find somebody who will allow you to express what you're feeling and vent and get some of that out. And it might just be doing it online. There's a lot of caregiver sites on Facebook pages and social media sites. Okay, we're going to move on to one of my favorite parts. Embrace the crazy. I think I looked exactly like that when I was a caregiver. And I felt that way. There's a crazy person in the house. No, never mind, it's just me. And the fact of the matter is that is so fitting for our circumstance because his dad had mental illness and his dad had dementia. And I could tell when he was hearing voices, and I would say, the others are here today. But what I did was I spent 7 years trying to save him from himself, and he spent 7 years trying to prove to the doctors that I was crazy, and he could take care of himself. So this was so fitting for us. I love this little guy, and I might even dye my hair purple. So when I talk about embracing the crazy, what I would like you to do is think about what you did when you didn't know what to do. Because I called it creative problem solving on the run. Because what I did this morning might not work at lunchtime, or what I did last week that was so successful will not ever work again. So constantly trying to figure out how to deal with this. So I'm going to ask you, anybody want to talk about what you did when you didn't know what to do and how that worked for you? Nobody? Okay, I'll share one of mine. I was taking my father-in-law to the doctor, 40 miles away. And he was extremely agitated, and he kept reaching for the handle to the door to the car. I'm driving down, 60 miles an hour, and he's trying to get the car door open or trying to open up his seatbelt. I probably had a whole line of cars behind me as I was driving over the mountain in Virginia saying, what the hell's wrong with that woman? Because she keeps slowing down, and but we got there, and we got there safely, and he saw his doctors. And we get in the car to go home, and I tell him to put his seatbelt on, and he said, I'm not doing you don't need the seatbelt. Don't need the seatbelt all the time. Yes, Dad, you do. It's the law. You have to have a seatbelt on. I'm not going until you put your seatbelt on. So he put his seatbelt on, and I started driving, and I got a couple miles down the road, and I hear the click, and the seatbelt comes off. So I pull over to the side of the road. Dad, put your seatbelt on. I don't have to. Yes, you do. I'm not moving the car until you put the seatbelt on. He says, well, it's going to take us an awful long time to get home, and Mike's coming home from work, and he's going to need dinner. I said, Mike can take care of himself. Mike can cook. We're not moving till you put your seatbelt on. I'm not getting a ticket. Puts the seatbelt on. I start driving. I go a couple miles. He pulls it off. I turn the car off and over, and he dug in. He said, I'm not putting my seatbelt on. I said, well, I'm not going. I don't care. And he dug in, and we sat there for several minutes. And I got bored, and I turned the engine on, and I turned the radio on, and I started to sing. You do not want to hear me sing. You do not want to hear me sing. So I sang through the song, and he looked at me when it was over. Are you going to go? I said, no, I'm not going. Another song comes on. I started singing louder. I didn't know the words. I made them up. I just sat there singing. And finally, he looked at me, and he said, stop singing. I said, put your seatbelt on. So he puts his seatbelt on. I pull out, start driving, and he looks at me and he said, you're a little bit crazy, you know that? I said, yes, I am, but I sing really well, don't I? He said, no, you don't. He never took his seatbelt off again. What do you do when you don't know what to do? When you're scared to death, somebody's going to jump out of your car. What are you going to do? In my case, I sang, and it worked. Maybe you have a beautiful voice, and it won't work, but creative problem solving on the run. Another time, he had infected toenails. A lot of times that happens with the elderly. They get really thick. And he had been to see the podiatrist, and they had shaved him down. And in the process, the doctor had nicked his toe. It was bleeding a little bit. So they sent me home with an entire package of medications to take care of this toe. Sterile saline and salves to put on it and special bandages for it. And I was supposed to treat his toe 3 times a day for 4 days and then take him back to the doctor. Well, he had a habit of going into the bathroom and sitting on the toilet for hours on end, waiting for something to happen. And this day he was in that phase, and he would leave the bathroom door open. And I said, Dad, come out. I need to take care of your toes. And he said, no, I'm not coming out. He absolutely refused. So I didn't want his toes to get infected, and I wanted to do what the doctor told me, and he wouldn't come out of the bathroom. So what am I going to do? I took the warm water with the sterile saline and said, put a towel over your lap. I'm coming in. And I'm on my knees in the bathroom, taking care of his toes, and soak the foot, dry the foot, put the medication on, put the bandage on, and just as about ready to finish, he starts to have a bowel movement, and he's telling me about his success in great detail. And later on in the day, Mike calls to tell me he's on his way home from work, and he said, boy, what a day I've had. You wouldn't believe what I had to do today. And I'm like, sorry, bud. I was on my knees in the bathroom treating your father's infected toes while he was having a bowel movement. And he just says, you win. I mean, you win. He also had a habit of taking tissues and wiping his eyes, and he would take the wet tissue and he would put it on a bare light bulb in his room. I was scared to death he was going to set the house on fire. And so I took the tissues away from him, and I gave him a handkerchief, and he did the same thing with them, and I see the scorched handkerchief. So finally, I just had to take the lamp out of the room and get a standing lamp because he couldn't reach it. I'd say, you're going to set the house on fire, and he said, well, I haven't done it yet. So embrace the crazy, and sometimes I think being a little bit crazy is exactly what you need when you're caring for somebody whose thought processes and whose movements and whose activities make no sense whatsoever. You join them in the crazy. So maybe he was right, maybe I was crazy right along with them, but sometimes being a little bit crazy is exactly what is needed. And embrace the crazy and laugh. There are moments in caregiving where it's so funny, you cannot get past the fact that it's funny or just weird. At one point, he came home with a catheter. And I was downstairs, and I ironing or doing something, and I heard him call my name, and I looked up, and he was halfway down the stairs with his pants around his ankles, saying, "Bobbi, come look at my penis." And I'm like, okay, what's this? Didn't know if this was going to be some kind of sexual encounter. You know, he didn't realize who I was anymore. What's going on here? It was as simple as the fact that it was leaking. But in that moment of craziness, not knowing what to do, and now it's to me, it's hysterical. I kind of like telling people that story. So if somebody comes up, you know, you're caring for them and say, "Come look at my penis," you know, it might be totally innocent, but sometimes it's not. Does anybody have a crazy story they want to tell?
So when I was working in home care, this is not caregiving for my grandmother specifically. So this was a unrelated person, and she had. So when you care for the person, you also care for their pets, right? And she had 2 little chihuahuas, and one of them had a tick. They didn't know about it. Well, I guess we didn't know about it until the dog was starting to. She was very friendly usually, but she was just not friendly that day. She didn't want to be touched. She was hiding under the bed, and we were trying to get her to see what was going on. Well, the tick had embedded in her fur and had swollen up and was like hanging on to the dog. And we were trying to get the tick out, but the dog wouldn't let us touch her. So we put a sock over the dog's head so we could pull the tick out. And that was probably one of the strangest things I did with a dog. I was caring for a person.
Thank you. Anyone else?
My mom's been diagnosed with Lewy body dementia, and she was diagnosed in 2012. So it was at a time when I had been laid off work, and all these things were happening, and so I ended up living with her, which it's kind of like, it's funny how the universe kind of make things happen, because it was almost like I was meant to be there. And I didn't know this, or after she had been diagnosed, and I was trying to understand her condition and everything, and there was one day where she couldn't find something, or it was her cell phone. She was constantly, because she still had her cell phone, and she was constantly losing her cell phone. So I'd call my phone to see like where it would ring or whatever to find it, and that day we couldn't find it. So I ended up going into her bedroom with her, and I can remember, I checked under the covers and what did you wear yesterday, and checked in the pockets and everything. And I remember opening up the armoire, and like a box of cereal fell on my head because she started hiding food. And I didn't realize she was doing this because, I was doing the groceries, and it was just like, I remember I turned around, I looked at her, and she's like, "So?" Like she was like hiding cookies from me and hiding. So it was like, not only did we find that, but I found like a bunch of other things. So it was just kind of like, embracing the crazy. It was like all of this stuff, because then all of a sudden I'm like, oh my gosh, what else is she hiding, besides food around the house? So.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And sometimes the things that are being hidden are very unpleasant, like used undergarments, and you just know. And the next, maybe their checkbook disappears, and they accuse you of stealing it. And what do? They're insisting. And I went to a caregiver conference, and the speaker said, "Well, what do? You say, 'I can't believe somebody stole. I'm going to go and call the police.' And you call a friend, and you have them calm the person down, because it's so important that we go into their reality. We don't try to bring them into ours, because you will never." Win an argument with someone with dementia. Their reality is as real to them as our world is to us. And that was probably one of the things that I really didn't know. I kept trying to reason with him. I kept saying, "Why do you keep doing this? I kept thinking he was doing it on purpose because he could get to me that way, not understanding that whatever it was that he thought was real to him. And it's something that I see all the time on the caregiver websites. People asking, does your person in care ever do this? And losing patience with them. Okay. The next one may or may not appeal. Hey God, where were you? Why? Why is these devastating brain diseases affecting so many of our people? Why? And one of the things that I asked for weeks on end to Mike, to anybody that was around to listen to me, is why is this so hard? Why is it so freaking difficult to do the right thing? Why? Well, we're Catholic, and we went to church on Sunday, and we walk in, and the priest gets up in the pulpit to do his little sermon, and he says, I've been hearing an awful lot lately with people asking, why is it so hard? Why is life so difficult? And I got goosebumps up my arms, and they're there now. And I'm looking up, and I thought, okay, what you got for me? Why is it so hard? And what he said to me, what he said was, nobody ever told you it was going to be easy. What did you expect? The people that are considered saints in our religion didn't have it easy. Every single one of them went through fire of some sort. What did you expect? And a term I heard recently, and I put it on my Twitter page, was, we are not called to do what is easy. We are called to do what is necessary. And I thought, that is so true. That is so true. But what the priest said to us was, and I know he was talking to me, because I'm the one that was asking the question. When you do the hard stuff, you're earning your place in heaven. Service to others is your ticket. Service to others is the rent we pay for being here. But when we choose to provide service to others, we're choosing a difficult path. We may not understand how difficult that path is, but that's what we're choosing. And we don't always like it. Sometimes we hate it. Sometimes we want it lifted from us. So on particularly difficult days, when Mike would walk in from work, and I'd be standing there saying, I earned my place in heaven today. And sometimes he barely got his foot in the door before I was standing there telling him that. Guess what your father did today? And he would go upstairs, and his father would come out of his room and say, guess what your wife did today? And, you know, the poor man was getting it from both of us and saying, well, can you please just let me get in the house before you do this? But the way that I coped with it a lot of time was I cried a lot. I drank a good bit of wine, and I prayed a lot. And on one particular day, Mike walked in from work, and I'm sitting there with a glass of wine in front of him, and his father's standing there saying, you don't know about your wife. You don't know what she does when you're not here. She drinks, you know, she's a drunk. And Mike says, well, she drinks because of you, and I'm going to have one too. And he said, see, she controls you. She's going to make you drunk too. You know, the difficult days were when he was accusing me of poisoning him, when he was accusing me of holding him prisoner, when he reported to my husband that I hadn't given him anything to eat all day long, none of which was true, but was true to him. So I did a lot of talking to God, and sometimes it seemed that God was listening, and sometimes it seemed that God was busy elsewhere. And maybe not everybody in the room believes in God, but maybe a higher power or speaking to the universe and sending messages out there. But after several difficult months, I started praying and saying, I need help. Please, God, I need help. Send help any way you see fit. I need help. I'm at the end of my rope. This is killing me. I need help. And I walked into the hospital, and standing in front of my father-in-law's door was a social worker saying, Mrs. Carducci, do you need help? You heard me. You heard me. And they started providing started off with 14 hours of respite care with somebody coming into the house so I could take a shower, I could go and get my hair cut, I could go to the grocery store, I could have but they're understaffed too, and it went from 14 hours to 10 hours to 8 hours, and just kept getting cut back. But I was so grateful for even 30 minutes. I was going to take it. And the next time I heard the voice of God was Dad was in the hospital for one of the last times, and he'd been sleeping, and I was sitting at his bed, and he woke up and he said, I'm going back to Pittsburgh soon. Now, we live in Virginia. He had spent most of his life living in Pittsburgh. And I thought, okay, it's the dementia talking. And he says, I'm going to be with my wife again. Mike promised me that when the time came, he'd put me beside her. So I knew he was talking about dying. And I sat there and I thought, don't you cry. You just sit there and you listen. This is an important message you're getting. And he said to me, I had a dream and God told me my job is done. And I believed him. And I went looking for the hospital chaplain, and I shared that with him, and he said, you're absolutely right to do that. They know. And he went into in-home hospice, and he was able to die at home, which was his wish. He wanted to die at home. And we had a wonderful experience with hospice. They helped us so much through that transition process. But one of the things that a friend of mine said a couple of years after this, when I was sharing that story about him saying, God telling him his job was done, was he said, do you realize, Bobbi, that you were his job? That because of what you did for him, you are now able to do what you do now. And so when Caregiver said, I wish somebody would write a book that tells what it's really like, and I've been a writer since I was 8 years old, I did it. I wrote Confessions of an Imperfect Caregiver. And if you ever read the book, and I'm not here to sell it to you, but if you ever do, you will find out exactly how imperfect I am. And there are people, maybe you've heard this, when you tell them that you're a caregiver, a long-term caregiver, will say something like this, you must be a saint. And I think one of the reasons they say that is because if you're a saint, that means that you're somehow more qualified than they are. But I'll tell you this, I am no saint, and he would have been the first one to agree with you. I would like to invite you to ask any questions at this point or share any personal stories that you would like to. I'm certainly glad to hear it. There are handouts if you have the conference app. I have some links here to information on PTSD. I have information on rest and sleep as needed. There's a number of links there. And also my website, bobbicarducci.com.
You said we could ask questions.
Yes.
So I'm curious, did you know while you were providing the care that you eventually wanted to tell your story through a book, or how did you come to the idea that that was something that you wanted to do?
Well, I started writing when I was 8 years old. On a rainy afternoon when my best friend's mother got tired of the two of us running through the house and said, the two of you sit down and be quiet. Here's a piece of paper, here's a pencil, write something. And I wrote a story, and she told me it was good and that I should continue writing. And being a good Catholic girl, I obeyed, and I'm still doing it. And I work in, I'm the vice president of the National Writers Group, and I've been writing short stories on and on. So I thought I wanted to tell our story. And I started writing it during the caregiving process, thinking that I'm living it, I might as well write about it. And his care took all my time, so I had to put it aside. And then after he died, several months, I thought I'll go back to it. And then I put myself right back into it, and I couldn't do it. I would find every excuse in the world not to write that day. And it took about 2 years before I finally said, okay, I'm going to do this. And I'm going back into it, and you're going to have to deal with it, with all of the emotions, but I'm going to do this. And I did, and I'm so glad I did, because it's been called brutally honest. And caregivers who can read it, because sometimes it's too emotional for them, are grateful that I said, I lost my temper. When I said, I can't do it anymore. When I prayed for it to be over. And it's not that I wanted him to die, I wanted the pain to stop. And as you said, if we're not honest about it, if we don't tell people this, then they're not going to understand. And if you haven't done it, you don't get it, no matter how much that you think that you do.
So we were talking last night about how I work at Purdue University, and we have a farm succession group there. And I went into the community last year, and I was talking to people about caregiving and being prepared and how important it was to seek support, just like what you were talking about. And a lot of times how, as a caregiver, you become so overwhelmed, you don't even know what to ask for support for. And to come up with, if there are like lists on the internet of things that you might, tasks that you might be doing as a caregiver, and just like print that out and give it to people and be like, what can you do? And there was this woman there who said, oh, well, last year I went to the farm succession group and I talked to them about caregiving. And I was like, wow, I had never thought about farm succession and caregiving as something that would be linked together. But then it made sense to me, because as a farmer, you have to prepare for the succession of your farm. And part of that is getting older and also becoming more disabled and having diseases and that sort of thing. So I went to the group this year and I said, hey, like, is this something that you want to do again? How was did people react well to it? And they said, well, attendance was very low for that session. And I thought, I wonder why that is. And it made me think of, how do we reach out to people who will be in this situation in the future, but they are just kind of like resistant to it, or they don't think it's important because they haven't either seen it or think that they will experience it.
I'm glad you asked that. I think that's one of the things that's very much on my mind. And I am trying to establish relationships with the local employers to do lunchtime presentations on how to do this. I will take your question real quick, and then we're going to have to wrap up.
Right. I really don't have a question. I guess I'm chiming on to her because actually I work for Vanderbilt, and we actually have an elder care department where we do this. But I was thinking about what you were saying too, and how you talk to other people about being caregivers and preparing for it. And I always go to that quote by Rosalind Carter: there's 3 people in the world: previous caregivers, caregivers now, and caregivers that's going to be in the future. And
those who will need care.
Exactly. And I was thinking about your title with your book, Imperfect Caregiver. To you, in that situation, you may feel like you were imperfect, but you don't know what you're going to get into until you're in it. So really, from other people's standpoint, you were a perfect caregiver because you didn't know what road to go. You was thinking off the top of your head. So you were a perfect caregiver, but if you're a perfectionist like myself, it's like I'm imperfect because I'm not doing this, or I could have done this, or hindsight, I should have done this. But if you can go through this process and take care of that loved one, you were a perfect caregiver. And just even the people that I work with, you know, working with them, it's like, oh my gosh, thank you for being there, because this is a role that I never knew I was going to be in. And also, when you grew up or during life, you never said I was going to be a caregiver. I always planned for marriage, I planned for kids, but I never planned for being a caregiver. So it's like, you know, now where do I go since I'm in this situation?
Thank you so much for saying that. And I realize now that there is no perfection. There's no way to do this perfectly. God doesn't expect us to be perfect. And sometimes being a little bit crazy is exactly what's called for. Thank you, everybody. If you have the conference app, please rate this presentation. And thank you for coming. And if you want to talk to me outside, I'll be happy to do that.